So I'm just going to tell you some more of the stories that I have. And so hopefully we can kind of just continue on and get through a few stories and have a little bit of fun, hopefully. So remember yesterday I was telling you a lot about how mountain men are always hungry? A lot of people don't realize that mountain men, when they would eat, sometimes they would sit down and they would eat 5 to 10 pounds of meat in one setting. Now they didn't eat regular meals like we do. They would eat maybe once a day as long as the hunters brought food in. If the hunters didn't bring in food, then there was nothing to eat. And so they would sit down and they would gorge themselves until they couldn't get any more meat inside of them. So because eating was so important, I'm going to tell you a story about, I was out looking for some food one day and it had been about 2 weeks since I had eaten. And I was getting pretty hungry. And so right against this cliff, nice little valley there's a buck standing out there right next to that cliff. And so I get my gun, check the prime in the pan, make sure everything's ready to go. And I put the sneak on that old buck and I sneak up there. There's a creek right in front of me. I figured, well, this is close enough, so I'll take my shot from here. So I throw the gun up, and just as I get ready to pull the trigger, I hear this growling sound behind me. And I turn around, and there's this big old grizzly bear, and it's coming after me. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I've got to stop that grizzly bear, and I've got to get something to eat. So I threw the rifle up, and I fired, and I shot the cliff, and that bullet ricocheted, hit that old grizzly bear right between the eyes. When I hit the cliff, it knocked a rock off and it came down and hit the buck and killed him. About that time, I hear a rattlesnake between my legs. So I step back and I bash my rifle on his head. My ramrod goes shooting up in the air, and about that time, a flock of geese come flying over. That ramrod goes up, sticks one of them geese in the belly. That goose comes down, lands in the creek, and knocks 6 trout out on the bank.
Really?
And I had plenty to eat.
That is amazing.
Now, you know, most mountain men, when they're out in the hills and trapping and stuff, they use mules and horses. Well, I happen to have this donkey. And this donkey's name was Beelzebub. Now, Beelzebub was a good old donkey, and he'd go anywhere I wanted him to go. Why, he was as sure-footed as any critter out there. Well, we had everything all packed up one time. We was headed for the rendezvous, and we had this cliff that we had to go across. And there was just enough of an edge on there for the animals to hook their hooves in that edge. And so we're being real careful. We're taking all the animals across this cliff when old Beelzebub slips. And he falls all the way down to the bottom of this cliff, and he's laying there on his back, dead. And so we climb down and we take all of our fixings off of Beelzebub's pack, and I'm thinking, you know, he's been a good donkey, but that hide would do me a lot of good. And so I skinned old Beelzebub out, and I put him in my pack, and we took off up and we went to the rendezvous. And we're in our camp one night when I hear this scratching at my tent. I'm like, what is that? And I pull the flap of my tent back, and there's old Beelzebub. And he's just a shivering because he doesn't have any hide on anymore. And so I'm feeling sorry for him, so I take his hide out and I put it back over him. Well, the only problem is when you take a hide off of something and it dries a little bit, it shrinks. So now his skin was too small for him. So I'm thinking, well, what can we do? When I realized that not the other day, we'd killed some sheep. And so I went back to where those sheep hides were, and I took some of those sheep hides and I sewed them along Beelzebub's belly so that his hide would fit. And sure enough, that sheepskin took hold, and from then on, Beelzebub could pack our supplies and would spin wool out of his, or spin yarn out of his wool from then on.
That is amazing.
Now, Juan isn't here. I was going to try and tell a story on Juan. Juan and I, see, we like to hunt elk. And so we went hunting elk one time, and sure enough, there's this big old bull elk, and he's standing out there. And so Juan, he takes real careful aim on this elk, and he shoots it, and the elk goes down. Well, we were so excited about this because we'd been hunting for a long time. So we go running up to this old bull elk. We lay our rifles on a log, and Juan goes up to cut this bull's throat so we could bleed him out. And just as he does, this old bull jumps up. And this bull is pissed off. And he is chasing Juan and I all over the top of this mountain. Finally, Juan ducks into a cave, and I climb this old dead tree. And I'm standing up in this dead old tree, and this old bull elk, he comes up and he just rattles his antlers on that tree. And he starts bucking it and hitting it. And I just knew I was going to fall out of that tree. And then Juan comes running out of the cave, and this old bull elk takes off after him. And so I start to climb down out of this tree, and the old bull elk, he comes running out of the cave again, and he starts chasing me back up the tree, and he's chasing me all over the place. He's racking his antlers on that old tree, and Juan comes out, and the bull takes off after him again. And I blew this one.
And then what happened?
I'm sorry. I blew this one. Holy smoke, it's been too long since I've told it.
Too close to the fire for too long.
So, anyways, we might have to go on to another story. We'll see if we can come back to that one. That's terrible. Okay, so we'll go on. Let's do. So we've been trapping, and we'll use Juan again. He's a pretty good old guy. Juan and I had been trapping, and we was getting pretty tired of working all the time. And we decided just to kind of go for a walk one day, and we're walking along, and we see these tracks on the ground. Now these are mighty peculiar tracks. You see, mountain men, we pay a lot of attention to what goes on the ground, because that tells us what's around them. So we see these old tracks, and we get down there and we take a look at them. And they're kind of long like a grizzly bear, but kind of round like a cougar. And we'd never seen this before. And so we decided that we was going to track this animal, whatever it was, and find out just exactly what that critter looked like. And so it goes right into these bushes. And there's these bushes right here. And you know you got to be really quiet when you're going through the bushes, because if you're not really quiet, you'll scare the animal away. So we're sneaking along, when all of a sudden, out of the brush, jumps this big old critter, and he's a cougar bear. And we've never seen a cougar bear before, so Juan, he takes off running downhill, and I take off running uphill, because everybody knows that cougar bears don't run uphill. And so I go running up to the top of this mountain, and I look back, and that old cougar bear's right on my tail. And I'm running and running. My old heart's about ready to beat out of my chest when I spy this pine tree. And so I jump. The bottom limb's about 18 feet off the ground. So I jump, and I grab hold, but I missed the limb.
Dang.
But I caught it on the way back down.
Good for you.
I grab hold of that limb, and I climbs up to the top of that old pine tree, and that old cougar bear, while he's down there, he's just a snarling and growling, saliva coming off of his teeth. Well, everybody knows that cougar bears can't climb trees. So I'm sitting there hanging onto that old pine tree, and that old cougar bear's walking around, and he's snarling at me and growling, and then he does something kind of peculiar. Why, that old cougar bear starts to jump. And every time that old cougar bear jumped, why, he'd get a little bit higher and a little bit higher, until pretty soon he was about to my toes. And I thinks I've got to do something, or that cougar bear's gonna get me. And I know that when people grab hold of my whiskers, it hurts. And so I got a hold of that tree, and I was gonna grab that old cougar bear by the whiskers. That old cougar bear jumps, and I shut my eyes, and I grab, and I miss. And I look down there, and that old cougar bear, he's down there circling around, getting ready to make another jump. So I'm hanging onto that old pine tree. That old cougar bear jumps, and I shut my eyes, and I reached and I grabbed hold of something and gave it a mighty yank. And I looked down, and that old cougar bear, he's just running around yelping and hollering and screaming, and he's running off, and he's kind of funny looking. And I look in my hand, and you know I'd reached right down that cougar bear's throat, grabbed a hold of his tail and yanked his hide right off of him. So I clumsed down out of that tree, and I went down, found old Juan, and he was doing okay. So we took that hide and we tanned it, and it's still in our lodge today.
That's funny. I was going to ask you, like, you took nothing left.
For real?